Hello, and thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping by. Um, Thanks for inviting me into your living rooms for the last 30 years. It's been a great honor. I'm very honored to be invited into your living room, as if you actually invited me there. As if my physical presence in your living room would be the same as when you're just listening to me on a podcast. There's definitely different levels of personalness with both of those. I'd say that you watching somebody on TV is not the same as you inviting them into your living room. I think we can all agree to that. Um, there's a lot of distance. You can maintain a lot of distance between the people on TV and yourself. I just watched the documentary Out of Shadows, which is about people in Hollywood being exposed as pedophiles, or like part of it is that they're linked to Jeffrey Epstein and his pedophile island or something. And but it's also about that Hollywood is linked to the CIA. They were making the claim that the CIA has a lot of influence over the narratives that are put out by Hollywood over Hollywood movies to tell the public what kind of stories and narratives they're supposed to want to follow. But they're just making the claim. They're just speaking to the ownership that government, corporations, and the media and Hollywood, anybody who's like given a lot of influence over your life, they're just talking about the influence they have over the story of America, over regular citizens. They're just making the point that that regular citizens are owned by an elite that make all the important cultural decisions, but they do that by propagandizing what you see, but by filling the programming on your TV and that you would see on Netflix, movies and television and entertainment that you watch. They propagandize that in a certain direction, but it's like they make the claim that it's controlled by a cultural elite. And so it's kind of just like, it kind of just harkens back to about 10 years ago. Everybody was freaked out about the Illuminati, and it is talking about the Illuminati again. It is Out of Shadows is like a movie bringing that back up, and the symbolism that pop stars use in their music videos, that's like satanic and stuff like that. There are a lot of YouTube videos made about that, and that was a big deal. People were starting to be worried about the Illuminati like 10 years ago or so. And it kind of talks about that, but it speaks more the actuality of demonic or satanic things that are involved in Hollywood, or famous people like Lady Gaga and Katy Perry that like I guess that Lady Gaga and a lot of Hollywood celebrities are friends with this person who's really into like satanic dinners where they sacrifice things. Like, they're all friends with this person, and some of them are maybe expected to be friends with this person, and this person like makes cakes that are shaped like humans. Like, this person has a big feast. What is her name? Let me look that up. Marina Abramovich is her name. She has these spirit cooking dinners that apparently she's really well known for, that she invites a lot of Hollywood celebrities, and they're sort of satanic, but she makes these cakes out of people that are like set up on long tables in front of all of her guests, and they just like eat these things that are these cakes that are shaped like people, like maybe have the same anatomy as people or something, but she's just into cannibalism and that kind of thing. They're just trying to link Satanism to it, but it's an interesting documentary. After watching it, I'm even more worried about the media than I would normally be, but only because it's like I would rail against the media. I would see that they are falsifying things for as long as I've acknowledged the media because it's apparent that they falsify narratives, but that they just have an agenda with their narratives and control the narratives. But even beyond that, like I can't even express how much of a narrative or how much of a story that they place all of us in, everybody that's subject to media driven narratives, because like that's our entire life. Like they sell us entirely on that we're all part of a certain story that involves electing the president every 4 years, and like how much big a deal that is. Like the importance of it is sold to us by the media, but just the importance, things that we're told as citizens are important to us and are meaningful to us, are sold to us by corporations. And that like we're told that we're supposed to buy all these things, and we're pretty much we're owned by Pepsi and all these corporations that tell us that Pepsi is what we should want in our life. But it's like the things that we eat, even just on a regular basis, are essentially told to us like that's what we're supposed to eat in a given day. Like stuff we eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like it's a advertising campaign that caused us to put bacon alongside eggs and eat it that way, like that we're supposed to eat, because that was like one of the only ways that somebody selling bacon could sell bacon, was to make it appear healthy, like put it alongside eggs or something. But there's all kinds of advertising campaigns that are like that. Just the fact that we're told that soda is a drink that you would drink at dinner or drink at all, or is something that we need, is a sort of falsified message, because it's not something you need. It's actually really unhealthy for you. It's just like if you ate a handful of sugar is what drinking a soda is. So it's not anything you need. It's just that the foods that we consume in our daily life are told to us, like we're told to us what's meaningful about our lives, is sort of the point that the documentary is making. So it's like, even I would rail against the media or see through their narratives, but like I am still subject to whatever it is, the story that I'm living in, that's controlled by like the media and anybody who's supposed to be influential, like whoever. But apparently the CIA has a big hand in the kind of stories that are told through Hollywood, or just making it appear that they just want the citizens to look at things a certain way and believe they're part of a certain story, according to this documentary. But that's somewhat true. I'd say the documentary is somewhat true, but what is true, it points to something that's more true, which is that we are totally subject to the whoever like that wants the story to go a certain way for us, and we're subject to the entertainment that's thrown our way to tell us what kind of stories are important. Like whatever films I've consumed through the course of my life that I've watched, they're telling stories that are in line with like what's important for a story. It's just that like it's not all of Hollywood is not like that, because so I'm saying the documentary is sort of false in some ways, like but as long as it's a documentary, they actually also have their own agenda. They're pointing you towards a certain message, which their message is kind of like they have to take a hyperbolic stance, like exaggerated, that Hollywood is entirely evil. But I think they would even say that what they mean to say is that there's worse in it than you would have thought, because there's plenty of directors that write their own scripts, but they write their scripts and they make popular movies. Like it's not the case. So the documentary is arguing that like the CIA has a hand in every popular movie, because that's what they want you to consume a certain kind of popular movie. But it's like the directors have most of the influence over the movies that they're making, and it's not like all the directors are hand controlled by the CIA or anything like that. You should check out the documentary. It's interesting, and you would be like, people who see the documentary and would take some stock in it. They wouldn't totally write it off as a conspiracy. Would probably be seen as conspiracy theorists, but it's the job of the media to paint anybody as a conspiracy theorist that would see outside of that. There's other narratives you can have besides ones that are driven by the conglomerate of corporations that tell us what our narrative as a country is. It's just that like you're in the narrative no matter what. You don't really have a say. And I guess you would only be able to get outside of it once we don't see the media as controllers of the narrative, but the people believe in their own responsibility to decide what is the narrative and the story of their life. Like, people already do that. It's just that America as a whole still has to be subject to, like, this is the pathway to the presidency, and this is the level of importance associated with it, and this is the way America is divided, and we have these problems in the country, and like all the problems that we have in the country are given to us by the media. The media presents those on a plate to us to tell us what our problems are. Like, the media will tell you what the country's problems are, because they get to decide what is the problem and what you're supposed to be afraid of. And like, they're going to tell you what to be afraid of because they get to decide that, but also they don't want any sort of cultural uprising. Like, they'll maintain their power as long as they can. I think it's interesting the relationship that our country has towards the idea of possession. I think that is a good description of everything that I started talking about with this episode, is our relationship to possession, because possession can describe you being possessed, or it can describe you possessing. But The Exorcist was a really big cultural phenomenon in the 70s, from what I understand. Like, I had already heard that in the 70s when The Exorcist came out, people were passing out in the theaters, which is like, I figured that's kind of like the effect that the Passion of the Christ had. Like, oh, a couple people passed out in the theaters. But from what I understand, it was like every single showing of it, people were passing out in the theaters. That, according to the people working in the movie theaters, were like, yeah, we have to escort people out every single show. And like, people were lined up all the way across the block for show times when the movie first came out. Like, tickets were hard to get. You would show up and wait for hours, and then the show would be sold out, because everybody wanted to see The Exorcist. And it was like, it crossed gender, race, and age boundaries. It attracted everybody, pretty much, from what I could estimate about it, from like seeing crowds and like a video I watched about it. But it had a huge cultural impact, and I think it's interesting that, well, like that and original movies like Poltergeist, original founding horror movies that we would look back to as these are like classic horror movies, when it's like the horror genre really took off. There's probably horror movies before the 70s or before The Exorcist. It's just that with The Exorcist, I feel like a lot of horror movies after The Exorcist are influenced by The Exorcist. Like, The Exorcist is kind of like the Beatles of the horror genre, or the Beatles is of rock and roll. Beatles, the Exorcist is to horror what the Beatles are to rock and roll. And but like a lot of movies after The Exorcist, they deal with possession, or like that's what I'd imagine is the greatest fear in people's minds in seeing the movie that caused them to pass out. But besides them passing out, they're all like really freaked out and whatever. Like, everybody agreed that it was a shocking experience, and you couldn't watch a horror movie now that would give you a shocking experience, because anybody who watches horror movies has seen all of them. Like, there's nothing really shocking about it as much now. That doesn't mean that horror movies don't come along that still have a cultural impact. It's just that you can't have the impact that The Exorcist did, because people aren't as freaked out, because they're not as shocked by horror anymore. It's kind of like the modern horror as a genre. The first chance you ever had to be really shocked by it was The Exorcist, and so that's like the most shocked that you could have ever been. And so movies come along after that are generally related to The Exorcist, like demonic possession, and like a lot of ones that become famous. There are ones that had a big impact that became famous, like even after the year 2000. Like, The Ring was a really big one, and The Grudge was really big when it came out. Like what else? Like Insidious was big when it came out. That had a big impact, and they all pretty much deal with demonic possession of some kind. Uh, all of those. Well, The Ring, not so much demonic possession, but a demon that attacks you that you have no control over, just because of an irreversible action that you committed. A lot of horror movies and a lot of what scares us the most, like especially in the Black Mirror series, a lot of what scares people about those episodes, like the most impactful or memorable episodes, I say, are the ones where somebody is trapped in a situation that is somewhat infinite or like irreversible, that they're stuck in a situation that they'll be in eternity in like a terrible situation, like the episode with the people on the Star Trek ship, where the Star Trek ship is actually just the computer simulation of one guy who likes to do this show for himself and go in and out of the simulation, where the characters in the simulation can't. But the characters in the simulation that are in this Star Trek movie simulation put on by the guy controlling it, they can't go in and out of the simulation. And they're stuck in it forever, but they're like real people that have feelings that would feel like you would if you were stuck in a situation that was infinite and irreversible. But it's kind of like eternity in hell or something like that. Like, that's the scariest thing that we could come up with. Understandably so. Eternity in a terrible place, because eternity is never ending. It's like that's kind of the idea that's spoken about through demonic possession, even in movies like The Exorcist. Even though it's not talking about eternity in hell, it's talking about being entirely possessed by something else to the degree that you have no control over your situation. Like if you were just going about your life and it was made known to you that you have no control over your circumstances, is what fear people find in possession. Because the fear that they would find in a movie like The Exorcist is the idea that out in the ether, in the unknown space around them, there are evil forces that would control what they do, or be able to control them to the extent that they could be possessed or something. But it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be afraid of demonic possession to be afraid of that. You can be afraid of that just in your regular everyday life, and maybe more so for Americans in an American life would be more afraid of possession. But like, so it's like an archetypal fear for Americans, I would say, is possession, but not just demonic possession, but the idea that you are inherently suppressed by some other force, or like that you have no control over, that there's forces that dictate your life in a way that you don't know about, that there's forces that are controlling you to go certain ways, like, or narratives that you're following that you don't know about, that you're subject to, that make it so that you don't have control over your life. You don't get to do it exactly what you want. Like, you might think that you're doing what you want, but in actuality you're possessed. And like, that would speak to like, maybe we develop that fear because we are in some ways being controlled by forces around us that tell us what to do, tell us what narrative we're supposed to have, or like tell us to strive towards the American dream, like, and as if we're not ever bigger than the American dream. So, but I make that point to say that the owners of these corporations that tell you what you're supposed to buy or supposed to want, and what foods you're supposed to eat, what furniture you're supposed to fill your house with, like corporations that run the world and emphasize material possession as what gives you happiness, they're going to sell you on that stuff, what they're selling, and call it the American dream. They're going to tell you that that's the American dream, is to achieve this, or to achieve popularity or whatever. And it's like something you can't really escape from being the ultimate goal, is like you following the American dream. But tied to that is that it's the American dream, and so you can't ever dream beyond what is told to you is America's narrative. But like where America's narrative would be controlled by all news outlets, even down to the local news. And there's a clip in this documentary that shows local news outlets, a bunch of different ones, saying this exact sentence over and over. And it's not a sentence that they would be saying as related to the typical headlines that they that circulate through their programming. They like is a sentence like this issue is going to affect our country's democracy or something like that. It's like kind of a I don't know what the exact wording of the sentence was, but it sounds like something you wouldn't be able to pick up on because it just sounds like something they'd say on a news program. But when you see the exact sentence said across a ton of different local news networks, you realize just the extent of the extent of the propagandizing that they do to tell you a single message like this whatever is going to affect our democracy. But it's just the work of the media to paint the picture that there's this democratic way about things that includes how you're supposed to view the election and the presidency and stuff like that. Like, this is going to affect our democracy. These issues are going to dramatically affect our democracy. But it is like the same sentence for these news networks, every different one of them saying the same thing, but they're all local news. And it's just like, it extends all the way to the local news, but the local news is like toilet water in what they're equal to, what they amount to. They're not worth much. But they're just as media driven as anything else. So it's like what I'm saying is there's a fear of possession that we have. And it's a fear, we build up that fear around demonic possession. We have a superstitious relationship like to possession, and we demonize it too. We demonize it by calling it demonic possession. There's no more you can demonize something than have this entire aspect of the idea cornered off as being demonic possession. Because we demonize it. That's how you demonize something. But I'm making the point that in movies like The Exorcist and Poltergeist, the fear isn't just fear of demons, because fear of demons is fear, essentially. Is what you demonize is what you fear. What you make a demon out of is what you fear. And like America as an individual, if there's something they make a demon out of, it's possession, seeing as that they have a whole horror genre based around like you make horror movies to try to capture what are the greatest fears of America as a whole. I mean, as the world, probably you want to be popular according to the world when you make a horror movie, but generally I'm talking about horror movies made in English, made in America for Americans that consume American type horror. A lot of the horror is based around, now some of them are real life murderer horror situations, but a lot of them are based around some sort of demonic possession that you would be afraid of. And that speaks to that the makers of horror movies know that in order to be popular, make a successful horror movie that's relative to everybody, they're going to follow certain themes with what they're trying to make people afraid of, because you're aiming to make people afraid. But that they would know that this is what makes people afraid just shows that like possession is a major theme as far as what America is afraid of, but we demonize it by calling it demonic possession, but also because we're afraid of demonic possession itself. But like we have a superstitious relationship to it, to the point that you don't want to talk about possession, or like you would be afraid of it. You'd be afraid of possession. Like Americans are afraid of that idea, but it's not just but like it just speaks to a subconscious, like a subliminal thing that we're trying to speak, that we're trying to exhaust out of ourselves, that we're trying to verbalize, we're trying to communicate, like we're trying to communicate a fear of possession. And so it's like subliminally maybe it's that we realize that we are possessed by certain forces around us, like governmental forces or media forces that tell us that our life is this story, or that we're supposed to strive after the American dream. But that besides like you being possessed by forces that are around you, it's like that you try to communicate that fear by like you react. Like a bunch of Americans have a big reaction to The Exorcist in the theaters when they're first presented face to face with a strong picture of possession. You know, like when that fear is really shown to them, that they would react by fainting in theaters, but like just being really afraid or being shocked by it and having to express those feelings to their friends or to people around them or to the reporters covering the cultural impact. Like that it elicits that kind of reaction out of people is shows that people are trying to communicate a fear of possession that they realize that they have, you know. But they would have that fear because America is based on possession, like material possession, like possessions themselves, you know. It speaks to a problem in our relationship to possession, if you ask me, because it's like being had by somebody that you would develop a fear of possession, if like, and a dramatic one, Americans would, when you are picturing that you as a person are a possession alongside possessions like that you would own. Like if you picture yourself alongside inanimate objects that you own, like a blender or a TV or a garbage can, like that's a really terrifying picture, that you would be made to be as low as an inanimate object or like an animal or something like that. That would be your fear in possession, because possession works both ways like that. The idea itself, you possess things, and then but you can also be possessed. But to the extent that you would be possessed, that would be like if you're made to be lesser alongside possessions, the same way you view your possessions. But you could be possessed by, like, say, a cultural elite that treat the citizens like animals, but treat them like animals because they're just herding them all in all these directions. They're herding them like cattle towards Pepsi or or McDonald's or these kind of storylines towards like being famous in this way, the American dream. If an elite group is controlling you through narratives, they are hurting you in all these, if that is true, you know, they're hurting you in all these directions that you don't really have control over, but basically you are a possession of sorts to them, and something that they just have to keep entertained, like if you were a pet or something like that. Not that your pet is your possession, but it is more like a pet is more your possession than like a person that you're friends with, you know. And you do things in order to help them out, to feed them, and like you tell the pet what their food is what I'm saying. You tell the pet what their food is and what they're supposed to be entertained by bringing the specific entertainment objects to them, to tell them like, this is what you have fun with. It's not, you don't force it on them, but like, as far as you bringing entertainment, you do force the specific kinds of it. You do tell them what food they're supposed to eat by choosing a specific food. And like, it's kind of like we have a cultural elite that treats us like animals, and in that way we are possessed. But I would say, like, a reaction to the horror genre, the fact that an archetypal theme through the horror genre is possession, is just Americans trying to communicate what is somewhat true about their circumstances and their relationship to possession, which is that they are possessed and have trouble articulating that. And so it's like it's a fear that you're given, as long as it's something you don't realize is true, as long as it's something you can't put into words. Like the same way that you have anxiety about things. When you have anxiety about things, the reason you have it is because you can't explain what is causing you to feel so uncomfortable about either being around people or driving on the freeway or something. Like you can't put into words a plan in order to save yourself from it, because you don't know exactly what the problem is, but it's just like a fear, an irrational fear that you can't overcome. But like why was I saying that? Like, it's like anxiety. It's something that you can't explain. Like, the fear of possession is there because people can't overcome their fear, meaning they can't explain it. But I would say, like, a step towards overcoming it is having a healthier relationship to the idea of possession. But you would only have a healthier relationship to possession if we didn't have this problematic relationship to it, where we have to acquire lots of possessions, because because Americans don't just express their fear of possession through their reaction to horror movies. They do it by possessing things, because possession is just a certain idea that works that way. It works in a fear-based way. Like, it's driven, your actualization of possession in the world is one that's done out of fear. So I wouldn't know if there's a set of ideas that work that way, that you would like you enacting them is done out of fear rather than in a positive direction. Like, there's certain actions or ideas that when you actualize them, they're negative for you. But like possession, I'd say, is like that, because you acquire possessions in order to protect against possession of yourself by your circumstances. Because you acquire money, you accumulate money, possession, material. You accumulate money in order to protect against a future where you don't have money, but you're protecting against a future where other entities around you would be able to control you or tell you where to live, like put you on the street, or like make it so that you don't get to eat the foods you want, but like you're very limited in your choices the more that the more that you're not able to control your future. And the more that you're not able to control your future is kind of like the less money that you have or the fewer possessions you have. So it's like Americans acquire possessions for their fear of possession, for their fear of being possessed by others, or like not being able to control their circumstance, for fear of control. They control things because of their fear of being controlled. But like, so you get money that way. You get money to protect against an uncertain future so that you don't have to worry about possession. But it's something you do out of a fear towards possession. So that fear towards possession will always be there, and it's always something we can't overcome as long as we can't face possession head on. But you don't face possession the more that you just accumulate possessions. And it wouldn't be a bad thing to accumulate possessions, but I guess I'm saying, like, as long as you continue to accumulate possessions that you don't need. But the narratives that we're subject to that tell us to buy these certain things, but like buy certain things, like you have to buy a computer and a cell phone to be like everybody else, but everybody else has it because culturally that is what's on the market capitalistically for you to buy. Like, it's a fad or a phenomenon. So it's like, even if there is a cultural elite controlling things, it doesn't mean you have to view it as that you're totally subject to them. Like, phenomenons or fads would happen, and they're central to everybody, relative to everybody, regardless of who initiated them. Like, you don't have to view the initiation process of new phenomenon or new inventions or technologies that everybody fills their home with as negative. You don't have to view that process as negative, because probably for all inventions there was somebody controlling it, that like, or manipulating a circumstance to their advantage, that just resulted in everybody buying the new technology. Like, you don't have to view the initiation of new technology as an evil process, because like, that's just what happens. Or like, it would have to happen some way, and maybe you would always be somewhat controlled by some group of people that causes the changes in your life. Like, the changes that are brought about in your life are going to be brought about some way. So it's not like you have to view your parents as evil, like the authorities that bring them into your life as evil just because they want to make money off of it or whatever. Like, that's just going to happen. Like, changes do happen, but I would say, like, the specific era we live in, maybe one of the most comprehensive terms you could give for the fears that would arise for us is possession, because that's just the nature of how new technologies are initiated in the world as it stands right now. Or like, that's the specific word, idea, function that you would call it, because it's like a function that corporations that tell you what to buy, or the media that tells you what story you're supposed to have, so you understand meaning to be wrapped up in a certain few things. Like, they are manipulating the function of possession. Like, they're manipulating the function of that and causing the citizens to have a negative relationship to it. But that is just that is just inherently what possession is like your realization that you would be possessed, and it might be inescapable that you have forces around you that guide you in certain directions, and where those forces are not just demons but they're people. Like, the thing is, we build up this idea of it as it being demonic possession, but like, you can demonize anything. Really what you might be referring to with that is just your possession by demons, where demons are people that are evil towards you, like people that don't have good intentions for you, that are controlling you in a number of directions. But like, I'd say it is like the material aspect of it, like you having possessions. It's something that you're going to be, something that's going to cause fear. Like our relationship to it is a fear-based one, because we're afraid of what happens if we don't have possessions, if we don't identify ourselves alongside the way everybody else is alongside everybody else's identifications. Like, you have to have the same things in your house as everybody else, and because you don't want to, but it's a process that causes everybody to conform to each other. They conform to a certain standard, a certain model. Like, you conform to a certain model with your clothing, because that is the fashion that is dictated to you at a certain period of time by the fashion elites. You conform to a certain model with the layout of your apartment, because the layout of your apartment is dictated to you by furniture elites, and so you are owned by them. And like, Americans, maybe our fear of possession is that we do not face that we are owned, and we actually just write it off as conspiracy theory most of the time. Like, we don't face the extent to which we're owned by the narratives of media, we're told what is important to us. Like, we don't face our subjection to the American dream, is probably why we continue to remain in fear towards possession, and why we're still so profoundly interested in money and accumulating money, and want to maintain our identities through our money and whatever. Like, having lots of money speaks to a fear that you have that things are about to go wrong. It speaks to that you don't trust yourself in the moment enough to make money, or that like things are going to work out. It speaks to lack of trust in God or the transcendent or the infinite, because you don't believe that anything will get you through in the given moment. If you don't have money, you get money so that you can become more like God and control your circumstances in case something goes wrong. You do, like, it'll make you more omnipotent the more money you have. And because so then you're facing the world out of fear, but out of like, you trust yourself less the more that you put your trust in money. The less that you have money, it kind of speaks more to, it's not like, but it's just, a lot of people are in circumstances where they're trying to get money. It's not like they're doing that just, it's not like people are poor just because they trust themselves more. But like, at the point that you would be able to face your fear, whether you're an individual or whether you're a country, is like, that's you taking responsibility for, you're responding to the fear. You're deciding to face it head on and give your response to it. Like, so it's kind of like America is subject to the fear of possession. They refuse to face it and give their response to it. But like, that just speaks to individuals have a responsibility to say what the story is for their life, that they don't capitalize on very often. They don't, we let elites, corporations tell us what is important to us. Like, people don't make good on what is meaningful to them. They give their responsibility over to people and corporations or authorities that are already in place, but those authorities are in place to take the responsibility. So it's like, but possession is a different, like, it's kind of difficult to tackle that as far as you just responding or saying that your responsibility could overcome possession, because it's like, possession would exist anyway. It exists anyway, since people in all these fields are already telling you what's important for your life, or telling you what the story of your life is, or telling you what you're supposed to find meaningful as an American or with the American identity. and like how much, tell you how much you're supposed to be the same as everybody else in America, or have the same dreams, have the same identity. Like there's whatever elites in whatever field are telling you what's, but like it's the problem is that we're subject to an idea like the American dream, and that like we have to filter things through the protection of our democracy, or like whatever that means. Like we have to filter things through this idea like the American dream, where the American dream is like possessions. So like, what am I saying? It's like we're subject to the American dream, you know. We're subject to that because that's what you're always trying to achieve. It's something you're always trying to get at. Even people in Hollywood, it's like, I guess they're the people that achieved the American dream, but they still have problems with their happiness or whatever. Like but they are the elite, so they've achieved the American dream, so they get to control the rest of the population. Is like sort of the idea. Like they become the cultural elites. Like I feel like it's a big part of the idea I'm describing is the American dream, whatever, like that phrase. Because we're subject to the American dream as long as we haven't achieved it. But apparently the American dream is just becoming one of the elites that controls the rest of the population. There's like a tastemaker or whatever. They tell you what is supposed to be good for you. They're like an influencer. So the American dream is becoming one of the elites. But we're always subject to the American dream. Like we're always contained by it. We're always contained where we understand the American dream to be like having the most power, the most money, the most fame. Is like the American dream. And so we're subject to possession as Americans. That would be an almost equivalent statement. We're subject to material. We're subject to wanting more money. But like the more that you get, but the American dream apparently is being able to possess as much as possible for fear of possession. The American dream is one of fearing possession. Like even if you achieve the American dream, you just become a possessor, like of all the regular citizens that you're controlling in a certain direction. If you achieve the American dream, you become an elite, then you're just a possessor at a higher level. And so maybe it's not so much a fear, but just like an attitude, like we actually want to possess. But then what causes us we want to possess just at a higher level. We want to possess as much as possible, even if that means being able to control and influence certain segments of the population. But like the American dream is becoming as famous as possible, to become really influential, to become a celebrity, to become a famous politician, become a president, to be able to influence everybody, whatever it is, like to become really big and famous, rise up the chain, and to become more of a possessor. But like the more money you get, the more possessions you have, the more influence you have, that's the more possessive that you get to be over the spirits of other people. And so the American dream is possession. So it is interesting that really central motif to the horror genre, for a horror genre presented to Americans, is possession. But like it's I think it just speaks to that subconsciously we're trying to process this unnatural way that we treat possession, or treat other people through possession, you know, or treat our possessions, or just that we're using possessions to possess things, to have control. Like it's an unnatural relationship that we have to control, that Americans would have more so than other countries, because other countries wouldn't be so much in the business of control. Other countries aren't as capitalistic as Americans. Americans are more centered on making different inventions so that they can be propped up as top inventor, or they can make a lot of money through the idea that they had. Like Americans they have more freedom to share their ideas. So it's like, as much as I would emphasize a group of elites that control America in a certain direction, it's like not that bad. It just sounds bad when you use those terms. Like Americans still have freedom to implement a lot of change on their own. They can invent things. They can work themselves out of their circumstances. Not in every case, but there's some things that are systemic that cause you to not be able to rise out of your circumstances. But you also need to give power to your ability to rise out of them. And it's like, America, you do have the freedom to rise out of your circumstances. It's not like we need to go about things worrying about the power that other people would have over us, but we do have an unnatural relationship to possession, and unnatural when you view it as like in kind of a more utopian perspective, but also a primitive perspective. Like primitively, before we developed all these constructs that separated us from each other, developed all these corporations, where the corporations have the authority to say that they're above regular people or other corporations based on their value, and their net worth or whatever, that causes them to be more valuable. Like before we had, primitively, before we were so focused on separations from each other through our relative values to each other, we would have seen each other as more equal to each other. But like our fear of possession is that we do possess and dream of possessing and want to possess and are worried about being possessed. Like it's just a fear of being possessed is what causes you to rise up the chain, I guess is kind of what I'm saying, is what causes you to achieve more of the American dream. You achieve it out of a fear of possession. So it's like, it makes sense that our horror genre is about, or a part of it is about possession, but like that the founding movies of the horror genre are centrally talking about possession, where like The Exorcist is the most archetypal horror movie that you could come up with, I would say. So it's like we achieve value, we either put other people down, like we try to prop up our own statuses, get higher statuses because of a fear of possession. So it's like only natural that we have a fear of possession, and that our dream, the American dream, is one of possessing. But like possession just works such that you possess out of fear of being possessed. That's just a relation. That's something that we do, or it just kind of speaks to why the intentions behind wanting to be number one, the intentions behind trying to gain the most attention or have the most influence. Like what would cause somebody to do that? Because not everybody is like that. Not everybody wants to participate in a competition where they're ahead of other people. And you don't have to do it as a corporation or as an inventor. You can do it just on social media, even on your social media neighborhood. Like you can participate in that competition, like get the most likes on your photos or be the most popular just among the people that you know. Like that social media inspires a competition that way, especially on Instagram. Like not that you'd have to view it as competitive, but you do want to get as many likes as possible, right? You do want to get as many followers as possible out of Twitter. Like that would be nice. Like that's at least part of why you're on them at all. I know that you're just on there to have fun, share things with your friends, share yourself, and like that's the purpose of it. But like you can be involved in the competitive aspect of it too. And but not everybody cares about a competitive aspect. Like you can be in podcasting too. Like I would want to have the most popular podcast. Like I care about competitive aspects of it, and like however many and like influence that you have. So it's like you wouldn't have to be like that, but certain people are more like that. And you're just going to have natural fears that are specific to your identity, and that's just the state of things in America today. Is a capitalistic state, or a state driven by acquiring the acquisition of material possessions. Like that's just the state of things in America. So naturally we have fears specific to our identity, and I would say like possession is a archetypal fear that we have. So like I'm not stating that like there's anything we have to do necessarily. It's just part of like eventually that fear will be able to intelligently pinpoint something more specific within possession that is more at the heart of the issue, and then in that way our fear will evolve and we will achieve a slightly different identity. But it's just your identity evolves, and at this century of America especially speaks to that, that the fears of our identity are based around possession. But I'm arguing that like individuals always have fears. Like you're always going to have something that is sort of antithetical to your identity, or like something that drives you negatively, probably as a challenge that you have to overcome. And you overcome it when you define it differently, in my opinion. Like America would overcome possession by recognizing their fear of possession, but then at that point the fear would evolve into something else, like in a different term that's slightly different, has slightly different properties, that like then we would have to pinpoint that fear and overcome that, like I'm making the case that people are subject to ideas, they are, like, but you can be subject to ideas as an individual momentarily or over a period of 10 years, like it can be, but it is kind of like identity itself is the subjector to you. Like you can have a spell cast over you as an individual for a period of 10 years by an idea, like the Myers-Briggs personality exam. If you're like filtering all your thoughts through the guidelines given by the Myers-Briggs, like that's how you recognize people or see things in yourself, is through the filter of the Myers-Briggs personality test. You like deem that to be true enough to guide your life by, you make that part of your identity for like a period of 10 years or so. That's just how you see things, like that you make it a really big deal. You're like, this person is a INTFJ, this person is a EX, because you want to control people and know people through that, and that becomes a part of your identity. It's like the Myers-Briggs has cast a spell over you. Your relationship to it is that you're subject to it in some way, and it is subject to you in some way. Like you have a relationship with it, but it's kind of like it's part of you for as long as you acknowledge it, respect it enough to be an idea worthy of influencing you, and it's like it casts a spell over you as long as you give it power to. And then at some point, like after 10 years, you're like, oh, I don't believe in the relevancy or usefulness of that program, of like the guidelines of it, and then you discard it, and then it's like you've faced it, you've outlined the borders of it enough to realize that it's not important enough for you to carry on with it in your life, and so you've defined it to some degree, and you can get rid of it and move on to other things that cast a spell over you and are your identity for a period of time. But it's like, so I'm saying that identities themselves are things that you are subject to, but are ideas that you're subject to. But also that possession itself is an idea America is definitely subject to, but they remain subject to it as long as they carry on all of their interactions that way, as long as it remains a focal point of the actualization of the American identity, is like, as long as we are subject to possession. But at some point we might realize that having possessions or being afraid of being possessed isn't worth it, and then we move on to some different fear or some different temporary way of identifying ourselves. But it's like we can build up stigma toward possession by describing it as demonic possession, like we build up this big fear, where fear itself is like demonizing something. Like that's what you're afraid of. So it's like the American fear as channeled through reactions to, like, I think The Omen was a big original movie, but like The Omen, Poltergeist, The Exorcist, Poltergeist series, like that's just you stigmatizing the idea itself, and like that's what your fear is the possession. It's like demonic anything is your fear, is what I'm saying. Demonic anything, but you can feel possessed, not just like, you don't have to look at it like demon possession. You can just be in your regular day and have anxiety. Like Americans have lots of anxiety about things, and part of that anxiety is that you don't have control over your circumstances. It's like Americans have this big fear of not having control over their circumstances, which is like naturally a fear that you would have, but it's in some ways an irrational one, when like it's a fear you have because you don't give power to yourself. You don't think that you have the ability to be rational at a party enough to like socialize normally or something. Like it's like Americans can be afraid that they are under the spell of anything. Like they can be afraid that they're too sad one day, there's nothing they can do about it, and it's going to make their day entirely terrible. Like that's kind of like, Americans can feel like they're possessed or under the spell of things. But yeah, you should check out of Shadows, that documentary. It's free, it's on YouTube. You can watch it, it's free, it's on YouTube. So it's like yeah, you can watch that. And they make a lot of points. It kind of goes all over the place. They try to connect lots of things together, so it makes it seem kind of sensationalizing, but it's an interesting message, and definitely some things in it are absolutely true, I would say. But not everything about their message is like totally correct. But you shouldn't write it off as a conspiracy. Like, Americans shouldn't. Americans should face their fears rather than writing people who are skeptical off as conspiracy theorists, because you can kind of make anything a conspiracy. Like, somebody like me who's more, maybe can tend to sound more towards like a paranoid conservative radio talk show host sometimes. Like, those people are painted as conspiracy theorists, but it's like, conspiracies are valid. It's just to the extent that you want to recognize a conspiracy. It's like, it's true that the media controls a narrative, has a narrative for us, and that we're subject to it, and that narrative is false in some ways. That's true. So it's like, it's not a conspiracy to say that, but other people can call people conspiracy theorists for proposing that to be a conspiracy. But like, it just making a conspiracy depends on how deep you want to go, because and the deeper you go, the less you're able to pinpoint what the actual problems are, the more that you're kind of speaking in generalities. But your generalities can be correct. It's just that sometimes there's not enough open-mindedness by people listening to say that you're headed in the right direction, or you're saying things that are sort of true, because people who hate conspiracy theorists will probably write them off because they didn't say everything they pontificated a little, or they said things from their own interpretation a little bit, rather than making sure everything was really factual. And so people can write off conspiracy theorists. But like, your conspiracy, you can really go as far as you want, because you can go as far as you want and still say true things a lot of the time about the ways that we're being controlled. It's just that, like, you'll be less and less entirely accurate the deeper you go with conspiracies you propose. And it's also very hard to falsify a conspiracy theory, is what people don't like about it, because there's usually some truth in them. You can't totally falsify a conspiracy theory because there's usually some truth in it. So like, people who write off conspiracy theorists probably just don't like that truth is relative. Like, you can propose things, you can say things that are both false and true at the same time, Like, people don't like that truth is relative, and they want people to say things that are only 100% true. But even facts and I think maybe they make this point in this documentary, like, even facts are presented to you by the media. Like, whatever is 100% a fact, according to, it's still, whatever is 100% a fact is oftentimes just what's agreed upon by an elite group of elites to tell you what is a fact and what isn't. And then fact checking websites arise that are entirely meant to just say that everything somebody says that's somewhat interpretational is false. It's objectively false. Like, it's not like fact checking websites like Snopes is garbage. I think everybody knows that by now. They're total shit, because they'll just say anything that is, they just say what they want. It's agenda driven. They're just liberal. Snopes is just liberal, but Snopes is just liberal. It's upsetting, but whatever. Thanks for listening. I'm not gonna be excited about this ending because I'm just like in too sad of a mood or whatever. But I'm sorry for Sad Sack Apology Man came back to close the podcast, but I guess that's just how it happens sometimes. And I hope you tune in for the next one. See you later. Bye.